This episode is brought to you by Mubi. Sign up at the link in the description to get a whole month of great cinema for free. Hello everyone, I'm Patrick Willems and welcome to our show, which I guess looking at the title sequence is just called Patrick H. Willems. Look, I know it seems weird, but I promise it's better than our writer's second choice, Patrick Willems' Magical Movie Tour Stravaganza.
The t-shirts would have been great.
Emma, I keep telling you, we're not gonna call it that. Anyway, if you watched The Vetoes, our recent Best of 2022 award show, you know that one of the big winners of the night, my #1 movie of the year, was S.S. Rajamouli's Telugu action epic RRR. And I am deeply embarrassed to admit that that was the first Indian movie that I had ever seen. And when you think about it, that's kind of insane. See, India produces more movies than any other country on Earth, about 2,000 every year. So why is it that here in the West, we just completely ignore Indian cinema? We watch movies from a ton of other Asian countries, but when it comes to India, we all just go, oh yeah, those are all those silly over-the-top musicals, right? And this has been nagging at me for a while, especially over the past year. So I figured I should finally do something about it. Of course, it's one thing to say, I want to get into Indian movies. Then there's the huge question of where you even begin. Like, what if someone came to you and said, hey, how do I get into American movies? That's 100 years worth of movies. Like, I just did the 1980s alone, and it nearly broke me. Where do you even start with that? And India is even more complicated because unlike America, you don't just have one main film industry in one language. You have over a dozen. And so I decided to start small. And by small, I still mean an overwhelmingly huge topic, which is how we do things on this channel. For this episode, I'm going to learn about Bollywood. Most Americans think that Bollywood means all Indian movies, which is incorrect because it's really only the Hindi language industry based in Mumbai. So for instance, RRR, which is in Telugu, is from a different industry altogether based in southern India known as Tollywood. But since Bollywood is the best known, it seems like a good place to start. For this, I turned to my friend Siddhant Adlaka. He's a frequent co-writer on this show and has been one of my favorite film critics since before we even knew each other. But what's really important here is that he is from Mumbai, he speaks Hindi, and has obviously been watching Bollywood movies his whole life. So he could be my guide for this journey into the world of Bollywood. So Siddhant put together a list for me with 8 movies spanning from the early 1950s all the way through to the mid-2000s. There were some classics and several things that he grew up watching. This would give me a good overview of some of the major highlights and major figures in Hindi cinema and how the movies evolved over the past 60 years. Quick side note for Indian viewers and Bollywood enthusiasts who are watching this, you might disagree with some of the choices or think that some essential movies were left out, so if you're annoyed, blame me. There was only so much time and we could only pick so many movies for one video. Okay, so if you're getting into Hindi cinema for the first time, there are a few key differences between Bollywood movies and Western musicals that I recently learned and feel like I should mention. First, the term musical. We all know what it means, but there's actually some debate amongst Indian critics and audiences about whether the term even applies to Bollywood movies. I mean, according to Western genre categories, sure, but the way a lot of mainstream Indian cinema works is that songs are just an expected part of the experience, even if they sometimes come out of nowhere, which the target audience is just used to. To some people, calling a Bollywood movie a musical is like calling a modern Hollywood blockbuster a talkie. Like, you're technically correct, but what's the point of even calling it that? In fact, even the term Bollywood is similarly debated, since some people feel it makes the industry seem like a Hollywood spin-off. The B was added for Bombay, which is now known as Mumbai. In fact, people who work in the industry will sometimes just call it the Hindi film industry. Second, unlike in most Western musicals, the actors are not usually the ones doing the singing. It's common for Bollywood movies to have what are called playback singers, and while that might seem distracting if you aren't used to it, it's been that way in most Indian films since the beginning of cinema. Which also kind of goes hand in hand with another thing you might notice, which is that the vast majority of Bollywood movies until recently did not record sync sound. There are a few reasons for this, from the kinds of cameras that were used and the amount of noise they made, to outdoor locations just being super noisy to shoot at, so after a while it became industry standard to record all the dialogue separately in the booth during post-production. Okay, so now that we've established some of these so-called rules you might have to get used to, let's take a look at that list of movies. We begin our journey with... I'm sorry, cut for a second. This isn't really feeling right. Like, we're talking about a topic that is loved by over 1 billion people, and I'm just sitting here at a table in a room in New York. Like, this isn't really immersive for either of us. We need to add some production value to it. Hey, Emma, how much do we have in the budget?
Not counting the bills too soaked in blood, $38,000. Also, my condolences.
Wait, what do you mean?
You inherited the money, right? I assumed that's what you meant when you said someone had to die for you to get it.
No. What actually happened was... You know what, yeah. Let's go with what you said. Inheritance. $38,000. That could add some major production value to this episode.
Patrick, that money should definitely be going to more pressing issues, like your outstanding debt, or a desk.
I hear what you're saying, and you're right, but I'm gonna need that money.
Where are you going?
Emma, don't worry, I'm only going to spend what is 100% necessary for this video. There'll be plenty left over for the desks and debts.
Look, Sam has a gorgeous voice, but a jet-lag musical? I just don't see it. Tara, could we get a meeting on the books to talk about Patrick and his weird briefcase full of blood-soaked money?
But if Patrick's not shooting an episode, we could lose the space. What do I do?
If you shoot it, they will watch.
Yes. Oh, almost. Wait. 1, 2.
Siddharth, money, video, India.
Patrick, calm down. You're just speaking in nouns.
Look, I need your help with the Bollywood video.
Yeah, you emailed me last week. I sent you a list of movies to watch.
That was then. This is now. And now, we have a budget.
Inheritance?
Yeah, that's what we're going with. Look, we need to get into the Bollywood mindset.
Oh my god. Are we going to Jersey City?
Bigger.
What's bigger than Jersey City?
Siddharth, we're going to... Is it necessary to travel to the other side of the world to learn more about a bunch of movies that are easily available to stream online? No. Is it financially irresponsible? Probably. Do I regret any of it? Absolutely not. So let's talk about India. I spent the first few days here just traveling around Mumbai and taking it all in. Mumbai is a chaotic place, and I mean that in a good way. Everywhere you turn, you'll see traditional Indian architecture next to colonial British styles, with people selling fruit in the streets in front of a McDonald's. The streets have no lanes, the cars honk their horns every second, and crosswalks might as well not exist. While I've been here, I discovered this amazing new extreme sport called crossing the street.
Seriously, if Tom Cruise really wants to impress us in Mission Impossible 8, the third act will just be him crossing the street in Mumbai over and over again. Because it's dangerous as hell. I had Siddhant here to help me get around and tell me where I could and could not eat. See, when Westerners travel to India, they haven't built up the immunity to the foods here that the locals have, and a lot of them end up getting sick. And I really wanted to avoid that. And so far, so good. At the gateway of India, several people stopped and asked to take photos with me. And at first, I was like, oh my god, cool, I have fans in India. And then I realized that they had no idea who I was. They just wanted to take a photo with me because I'm white. Look, as much as I would love to just make a travel video and spend the whole time talking about all the fantastic food I ate, I was here to learn about movies. So first, Siddhant brought me around to visit various locations tied to the early history of Indian cinema. First, we visited Watson's Hotel, where, in 1896, the Lumiere brothers screened their cinematograph for the first time in India. The building has been derelict for decades, and just recently started to be restored, so this was really just a construction site covered in scaffolding that we tried to peek into, but really couldn't see very much. Then we traveled over to the Hanging Gardens, a beautiful park in Malabar Hill, where H.S. Patavdakar shot The Wrestlers in 1899, the first film by an Indian director. Basically just filming a wrestling match that was taking place there. Now the real question here is, was that actually important? Or did Siddhant just want to force me to talk about wrestling again? Hard to say. After this, we went to the National Museum of Indian Cinema. As we walked through the museum, which had various displays telling more about the history of the places that we had just visited, we came across a large statue of a guy who's kind of like a happy tramp, with a hand on his hip and a bindle slung over his shoulder. This was Raj Kapoor, as his character from the first movie on our list, Awaara.
Raj Kapoor is generally regarded as one of the great auteurs of Indian film. When he was just 27 years old, he wrote, directed, and starred in Awaara, his third film, and I got a real Orson Welles vibe from him. Not in appearance or general vibe, but just as an extremely young, extraordinarily talented actor-director working in a similar era. And I should say here that I will inevitably be making a lot of comparisons to Western cinema, since that's the perspective I'm coming from, and this video will be watched by a mostly Western audience. These films and filmmakers obviously have their own identities outside of any American equivalents. Those are just my frame of reference. I'm not sure what exactly I expected from a black and white Bollywood movie from the early 50s, but it wasn't this. This is a contemporary social drama that is explicitly political with strong socialist themes, exploring how people are products of their environments and how crime is a product of poverty and class inequality. Raj Kapoor plays Raj, a man on trial for the attempted murder of a judge, played by his actual father, Prithviraj Kapoor, the head of the Kapoor dynasty that is still going strong in Bollywood today. It then flashes back to tell the story of Raj's life, how he grew up as a vagabond in the slums, stealing to get by and to take care of his mother, and eventually discovering that this judge is his father, who threw his wife out on the street when he mistakenly believed his child had been fathered by a notorious criminal. The movie feels shockingly modern, and not just because it is partly a courtroom drama. The camera work is far more dynamic than that of most Hollywood movies of the same era, with lots of big dramatic crane shots and some incredibly striking day-for-night cinematography. Even though Awaara is ostensibly a grounded drama about crime and poverty, that never limits it stylistically. It seamlessly moves from realism, shooting on location in the streets of Mumbai, then known as Bombay, to operatic, stylized fantasy sequences. The highlight of these is a dream sequence that begins in heaven, full of striking minimalist production design, before plunging into hell, full of dancing demons, fire, and giant skulls. It rules. Like a lot of popular Indian movies, this is a musical. The songs are great, but the standout number is the title track, Awaara Hoon, which translates to I'm a Vagabond, and it introduces Kapoor's character as he expresses his optimistic, hopeful view of the world despite his life of poverty and incarceration. It's actually still a really popular song in a lot of different countries, and the movie was so beloved in Turkey that it was remade there 8 different times. See, Awaara may not have been a hit in the US. In fact, I'm pretty sure most people watching this video have never heard of it, but it became the highest grossing film ever in any language, not just in India, but also in China and the Soviet Union. Oh, and it also competed for the grand prize at the Cannes Film Festival, so clearly, it has a little something for everyone. All right, one movie in, we were off to a great start.
Next up was Pyaasa from 1957, the shortest movie on the list at only 2 hours and 26 minutes.
Like Awaara, this one was also directed by its star, Guru Dutt. And look, I know I referenced Orson Welles when talking about Raj Kapoor, but I may have spoken a bit too soon, because a 2009 New York Times article about the work of Guru Dutt literally referred to him in the headline as India's Orson Welles. So there you go. And honestly, this does seem more accurate. He has a brooding intensity that is much more reminiscent of Welles than Kapoor's smiling, Chaplin-esque showman. For the second movie in a row, this is definitely not what most Westerners would think of as a Bollywood movie. Pyaasa is a small, intimate drama about a man struggling to make a career as a poet in a newly independent India, while being torn between 2 women from 2 different social classes. And since, again, it is a musical, anytime a character recites a poem, it turns into a song. This is a great conceit and allows for a natural transition into the more heightened cinematic language of the musical numbers. It's a very serious movie, but there is a bit of levity provided by a supporting character who has my favorite song in the movie, where he walks around a park offering massages to the people he encounters. And he's played by an actor nicknamed Johnny Walker, which is fun. Like Awaara, occasionally the grounded drama will make way for a fantastical operatic fantasy sequence, set in an imaginary dream world that is usually full of fog swirling around the actor's feet. Something that's becoming clear just from these 2 movies so far is that Indian movies seem to feel far more comfortable switching tones and styles than Western movies do. With the occasional exception of something like Hitchcock's Vertigo, you don't see a lot of surreal fantasy sequences in American dramas from the 1950s. Pyaasa has this incredible climactic scene where Vijay, the main character, who everyone in the movie thinks is dead, arrives at a theater to witness a celebration of his work, and he enters with this huge, intense, dramatic light blasting in behind him. It's great stuff. And it turned out that the location where this was filmed, the Asiatic Society Library, was just a short drive from where I was staying, so we went to take a look around. It's of course about 70 years since this was filmed, and the building had been renovated, so it didn't look much like it does in the movie, but it was still a good excuse to visit a cool place and get a feel for some Bollywood history.
And now we begin our shift out of black and white with a movie from 1960 that is mostly in black and white, but with a couple scenes shot in glorious Technicolor. Although the version most commonly available these days is a gaudily recolored version released decades later. This is the 1960 epic historical romantic drama, Mughal-E-Azam. At the time of its production, it was the most expensive Indian film ever made, and for more than a decade, the highest-grossing film in the country's history. It had its lavish world premiere at the Maratha Mandir Cinema, where it ran for 6 years, and that place is still around, so we went to check it out.
In this one, Prithviraj Kapoor, who played the judge in Awaara, returns, and once again, he's playing a bad dad. This time, he is a dramatized version of the real Emperor Akbar, who disapproves of his son, Salim, falling in love with a court dancer, a common woman who is deemed to be beneath him. And this conflict drives father and son to go to war against each other. The battle scenes, featuring elephants, explosions, and an insane number of extras, are genuinely spectacular, and on par with anything seen in a Hollywood movie from that era. It's also a film where the story of the production is as enormous as the movie itself. Director K. Asif began shooting it all the way back in 1946, but when India was partitioned by the British the following year, his key financier migrated to the newly formed Pakistan, and his original lead actor died of a heart attack in 1949. So he began shooting it all over again in the early 50s, with each scene being shot 3 different times, one for the Hindi version, and one each for a Tamil version and an English version that would never actually see the light of day. This is also the 3rd movie in a row that deals heavily with the idea of class, despite none of them explicitly mentioning the caste system. The first 2 featured protagonists struggling to rise up from their impoverished upbringings, and Mughal-E-Azam is about society decreeing that people from different classes should stay separate and only marry within their own class. And it turns out that this was a major recurring theme in Indian cinema. In fact, it goes all the way back to at least the first ever Indian talkie, Awaara from 1931, which is about the forbidden romance between a prince and a commoner. Oh, and Prithviraj Kapoor was in that one too. The guy made a lot of movies. Anyway, Awaara would have been a great place to start this journey, but unfortunately, the last known copy was destroyed in a fire at India's National Film Archives 20 years ago. That sucks. One thing I've been learning talking to Siddhanth is that film preservation in India is not great. The physical media market there has pretty much died, so even something as popular as RRR doesn't have a Blu-ray release. To watch Mughal-E-Azam, we ordered a DVD, which didn't play. And then we ordered another, which also didn't play. So to finally find a working copy, here's how many we had to buy. And the one that did finally work is in, let's say less than standard definition. What's frustrating about Mughal-E-Azam is that if you read anything about the production, so much of the discussion comes from how extravagant it was, how elaborate the sets and costumes and lighting were. But based on the transfer on the DVD I watched, you just can't really tell. This is a movie from 1960, but looking at this video transfer, I initially assumed it was made in the 30s. The resolution was terrible, most of the detail was lost, and the whole thing jittered the whole time, like it was from an ancient film projector. And so one of the main selling points, the spectacular visuals, barely registered during the black and white scenes. However, some of the scenes shot in Technicolor, like the one in the Hall of Mirrors, does actually look amazing even in this terrible transfer. For this scene, Lawrence of Arabia director David Lean was actually brought in as a consultant on how to shoot it and light it, and his opinion was, nope, it can't be done. But Asif had already spent over a decade making this movie, and he was not gonna take no for an answer. In fact, when he saw the end result, he then decided he wanted to reshoot the entire movie in Technicolor, but thankfully, cooler heads prevailed. The result was a part color, part black and white epic that saw 100,000 people gather outside Maratha Mandir to buy tickets the day before it opened. And this was 15 years before a similar phenomenon would lead to the term blockbuster being coined for Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Mughal-E-Azam went on to become the highest grossing Indian movie of all time. But one movie would become even bigger.
Okay, and now movie number 4. Arguably the most famous movie in the history of Indian cinema. Folks, we're talking about Sholay.
Sholay is a radical departure from the previous few movies. It is absolutely nothing like the Shakespearean drama of Mughal-E-Azam. See, this is a quintessential example of what became known as a masala film. In food, masala refers to a mix of spices, and in film, it means a mix of genres. So Sholay immediately establishes itself as an Indian riff on spaghetti westerns, jumping into an action scene on a train with two wisecracking heroes in a shootout with guys on horses. Then, when those heroes end up in jail, it becomes an extremely broad comedy, with this absurd, bumbling prison warden who looks exactly like Hitler. 20 minutes later, it turns into a romantic comedy. And then a bit later, it pivots into a harrowing flashback sequence as a character tells the story of how a villain named Gabbar Singh murdered his entire family, kids included, and then, I kid you not, cut both his arms off. So again, to put it in Western terms, Sholay is like if you mixed Indiana Jones, the Pink Panther, Once Upon a Time in the West, and Singing in the Rain together into a single film. Folks, this movie has everything. It's awesome. I'm sorry to be a living version of the Boss Baby vibes meme, where I've only seen RRR, and then I watch another Indian movie and go, getting a lot of RRR vibes from this. But in the case of Sholay, I don't think I'm wrong. Sholay is an action movie about two best friends who travel around on a motorcycle together. It will become a romantic comedy for several minutes, then have a musical number, then make a hard turn into grand operatic tragedy. Look, I'll put it this way. In the Hindi dub of RRR, the final song, Etara Janda, is literally renamed Sholay. And the song Dosti kind of feels like a throwback to a similar song in Sholay called Ye Dosti. So I don't think I'm crazy here.
But to really understand how big this movie is, like this was as big in India as, say, Star Wars was in the US, I wanted to talk to someone who was actually around when the movie came out. So I sat down to ask Siddhant's father about it.
Sholay is the most popular Indian film ever made. It released way back in 1975. I was in my pre-teens. I think I must have watched that movie maybe on the first or the second day of its release. Over the next sort of 10-15 years, I must have watched that movie at least a dozen times. While switching channels, if there's Sholay playing, I would just stick on to that channel and watch the movie right till the end. I think it's one of those films that kind of grew on you. And even if you go back and read about Sholay, I think the early on sort of verdict on the film wasn't that great. Initially, they thought the movie wouldn't do that well, but over a period of time, that movie just grew on you. And I guess if I look back, the popularity of the theme, the way it was shot, the story, the acting, I mean, just about everything associated with that movie sort of became popular. One of the things that was absolutely unique at that point in time, and I'm not sure if it's happened ever since, was the fact that you had audio recordings of the dialogues of the movie becoming so very popular. I must have been in my early teens when we got our first sound system in the house. And in addition to buying tapes which had songs, we also picked up a tape which had the dialogues of Sholay. There were so many lines that became so very popular and are still used in mainstream life in India today. I mean, kitne aadmi the? How many men were there? Kitne aadmi the? That's something which is a cult dialogue, and if you just have to say that to anybody, I think each and every person who has that knows it's associated with the film. If you think about a movie as a complete package, I think nothing ever comes close to Sholay.
One of the most iconic sequences in Sholay is the musical number set during Holi, the annual Hindu festival of colors that you might know from that one Coldplay music video.
And it just so happened that Holi was happening during our trip. So obviously, we had to go take part.
Holi kabe? कब है होली कब
होली के दिन दिल खिल जाते
Okay, we are back from intermission and onto the second half as we enter the modern era of Bollywood. And we are kicking this part off with one of the biggest, most iconic Indian movies of all time. We're talking about a little romantic comedy from 1995 called Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, but more commonly known as DDLJ. And with DDLJ, we have to talk about the lead actor, a guy who has been the biggest Indian movie star of the past 30 years or so. I'm talking about Shah Rukh Khan. I need to establish how big a deal this guy is here, because there isn't really a current American star who is an accurate analogy. Like Tom Cruise or Will Smith, Leo, Brad Pitt, Robert Downey Jr., none of those guys are even close. Stick with me here because I need to take you on a weird little journey to explain this. In India, there are a ton of remakes of Western movies. Everything from Memento to Mrs. Doubtfire to The Godfather has an Indian remake. And last year, a movie called Lal Singh Chaddha was released that was a remake of Forrest Gump. And I know how weird that sounds. We're all familiar with Forrest Gump, and how a lot of that movie is about how this one guy accidentally plays a major role in all of these huge events in 20th century America. You remember that part where Forrest, as a kid, meets this musician and teaches him a cool new dance move, and then that musician turns out to be Elvis? Well, in Lal Singh Chaddha, instead of Elvis, little Indian Forrest Gump meets Shah Rukh Khan, playing himself digitally de-aged, and he teaches him to do this iconic pose that he does in practically all of his movies. And so that's how big a deal Shah Rukh Khan is here. He is as big as Elvis at his peak. I mean, he's literally nicknamed King Khan. And since the Hindi film industry is based in Mumbai, he actually lives here, and people gather outside his house every single day in the hope that they might catch a glimpse of him. And so we figured we should stop by and check it out. Unsurprisingly, SRK did not appear. I think he was busy shooting a movie. But we could see the platform over his gate where he stands sometimes to face the crowd. And hanging out there with this crowd and seeing their excitement really made me wish that I could have watched DDLJ in a theater with them. So anyway, Wait, what?
It's still like
Okay guys, so fun fact, I just learned that DDLJ has actually been playing continuously for 28 years in one theater in Mumbai, the Maratha Mandir Cinema, the same place that Mughal-E-Azam opened, and there's a showing today in like 20 minutes, so we gotta go. So we went back to Maratha Mandir to watch DDLJ, and considering that this movie has been playing non-stop for nearly 3 decades, there were a surprising number of people there. Like, the whole balcony was packed. And when SRK appeared on screen for the first time, the crowd went wild.
Anyway, back to DDLJ. This immediately felt like a radical shift from everything that I've seen so far. After serious black and white dramas, period epics and Western-style adventure movies, suddenly, this movie begins and we're in contemporary London with characters playing rugby and going to college. This movie actually kicked off an entire wave of Bollywood movies set in Western countries, where Indian characters living there would either return home or yearn nostalgically for their native cultures. And it's arguably the film that made Bollywood a global commodity by being marketed towards South Asian diasporas abroad. This definitely felt the most familiar of any of the movies so far, since for most of the running time, it is a pretty classical romantic comedy. Shah Rukh Khan plays Raj, a rich, immature guy who just failed to graduate from college in London. On a backpacking trip through Europe with his friends, he meets Simran, an Indian girl also from London whose father has just arranged a marriage for her to a guy in India. At first, Raj and Simran hate each other, but then, after getting stranded together in what looks like the Swiss Alps, I think you can see where this is going, they start to grow closer. But by the time they realize they love each other, she is on her way to India to get married. So obviously, he has to go there, stop the wedding, and hijinks, as well as some surprisingly bloody fight scenes, ensue. Oh, and I skipped over one of the most important parts. Simran's father is played by Amrish Puri, best known to Americans as Mola Ram from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and he is just as intimidating a figure here. One thing that immediately struck me about DDLJ is, how do I put this? How much sexier this movie is than the earlier ones. Less than 10 minutes in, Simran, played by Kajol, performs a musical number with only a towel wrapped around her. Scandalous. The songs have lyrics about making love. At one point, Simran wakes up with no memory of the wild, drunken night before, and she thinks that she and Raj slept together. Of course, there is no actual sex or nudity in the movie. And here's where I should mention something that I learned watching all of these. Not only are we never going to see nudity or a sex scene because of India's strict censorship, but no one ever kisses on screen. Like ever. It's not something that really happened in Bollywood until recently. These movies are full of romance, characters are always falling in love, the sexual tension is crazy, but they will not kiss. Instead, the closest we get is this, passionate hugging. Obviously, this is a cultural thing, but as a Westerner, it is wild to watch an epic love story play out and build up to the moment where the huge dramatic kiss would usually happen, and then it doesn't. Also, the aforementioned Shah Rukh Khan pose, the one he apparently learned from Little Indian Forrest Gump, is on full display. In the second half of the movie, when he has traveled to India, Simran first sees him in a field of yellow mustard flowers, as he raises up his outstretched arms, and she rushes toward him. This is true iconic movie star shit. Watching it, I immediately went, okay, yeah, I get why this is such a big deal. It rules.
Our next movie, from 2001, was the anti-colonialist sports drama Lagaan, a period piece all about cricket. At the time, it was the most expensive Indian production ever, and only the third Indian movie to be nominated for Best International Feature at the Oscars. The birds here are noisy.
So Sholay and DDLJ reminded me of lots of American movies, from rom-coms to westerns, but Lagaan, which actually translates to taxes, felt even more familiar than that. While it is a nearly 4-hour-long Indian musical period piece, it is also a perfect example of a beloved genre that we have seen in Western cinema for our whole lives. I'm talking about the underdog sports movie. Lagaan is set during the British Raj in the late 1800s, and it tells the story of a group of villagers who are challenged to a cricket match by the British Army to settle whether or not they have to pay taxes during a period of severe drought. I'm so sorry to once again go getting a lot of RRR vibes from this, but it's unavoidable here. I realize that there are lots of Indian movies that deal with struggles against British rule, but RRR is the only one I've seen. Lagaan is a period piece with Indian farmers facing off against insanely evil British colonizers, and just like in RRR, there is one nice white lady who helps them out. Except unlike in RRR, the Jenny of this movie, whose name is Elizabeth, actually gets her own musical number, and she falls in love with the hero of the movie, Bhuvan, played by Aamir Khan, but he ends up rejecting her. It's brutal. Oh, and since I mentioned the musical number, it turns out the music in this movie is actually by someone that other Westerners might know. A.R. Rahman, who won an Oscar for the score for Slumdog Millionaire. And this soundtrack is wall-to-wall bangers. I mentioned earlier that the first few movies all dealt with social hierarchies, but Lagaan is the only one that has directly addressed the caste system. At one point, as the team is training at cricket, they encounter a character named Katra, who is considered an untouchable by virtue of the social status he was born into, that of someone forced to clean and pick up after other people. I mean, the name they call him by, Katra, literally means garbage. He is shunned by the village, and they quite literally will not make physical contact with him. But then, it turns out that a physical disability that he has allows him to throw the ball with a spin that makes it incredibly hard to hit. And so, they embrace him as he becomes a star player on the team. A classic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer situation. And if you're wondering if he features heavily in the climactic moments of the game, yes, duh, of course he does. Have you ever seen a movie before? That's how it works. Anyway, I think this is so interesting because it is a classic storytelling trope that we have seen in countless Western movies, but here it's handled in such a culturally specific way. So while Lagaan is a Bollywood musical period piece, it is also 100% a quintessential example of the classic underdog sports movie. The Indian team is a ragtag group of lovable misfits where everyone has some kind of special skill or weakness, like the really angry guy who can hit great but can never catch the ball. And of course, there's that one final star player they find to round out the team, like Jackie Earle Haley and the Bad News Bears. And the team they're up against, the British, are truly one of the most loathsome rival teams in sports movie history. Up there with Team Evil from Shaolin Soccer, or Team Iceland from D2 the Mighty Ducks, or the Decepticons in Transformers. They deliberately hit the Indian players with the ball, they call them slaves, and laugh about how they're destroying their civilization. These British guys fucking suck, and I want them to lose. As I was watching it, I thought I noticed something different about the dialogue scenes, so I looked it up and it turns out I was right. As we established earlier, a significant number of Indian movies are shot with the dialogue completely dubbed in post-production, also known as ADR. When it was released in 2001, Lagaan was the first Bollywood movie in 30 years to use synchronized sound, meaning the dialogue and audio were actually recorded live on set, as it is with most Western productions. What I found interesting about the way Lagaan handles cricket is that it assumes the audience is already familiar with the sport, so it doesn't really bother to explain the rules, which was a slight problem for me since I don't really know how cricket works. I could figure out enough, and cricket has enough similarities to baseball that I could generally follow what was happening, especially in the important climactic moments. But I did leave the movie still a bit unsure about like how exactly the scoring works, or what the position of the players on the field is, or how the match is structured.
This trip is obviously about having the full immersive experience. And as an American, I have never really watched cricket, and I don't know much about it. But it turned out the very next day, there was a big cricket match happening between India and Australia at Wankhede Stadium. And so, we had to go.
We showed up at the match at halftime, so we only watched the second half, which meant that we were there for 4 hours. Cricket matches are long as hell. Like the match in Lagaan takes 3 whole days to play. The structure is also very different from baseball. Instead of switching back and forth between batting and fielding every few minutes, the match is just split into 2 halves. One team bats first. In this case, it was Australia, who scored 187 runs in the first half, and then they switched sides, and India was up. And finally, after 4 hours, they got more than 187 runs. The match was over, India won. It was great. It's the sort of thing that you just kind of watch passively for a while, but then during that last hour when the score is getting close, it gets really fun. And it turned out that at the cricket match, we got a big celebrity appearance for the episode. Ajay Devgan, the Bollywood star who plays Ram's father in RRR, was there, and he made a lap around the field and waved to everyone. See? There he is. A real movie star.
But then we thought we should take it further. If I really wanted to appreciate Lagaan, a movie about people learning to play cricket, then it was obvious what I had to do.
बार हाँ बोलो यार हाँ अपनी जीत हो उनकी हार हाँ बार बार हाँ बोलो यार हाँ
Anyway, cricket is hard and frustrating, and I have come to the conclusion that baseball is a better sport. So my apologies to the people of India, and to a much lesser extent, the people of Britain. One more important thing about Lagaan. This is actually the final appearance on this list of one of the most important figures in Indian cinema, who has been a part of 5 of the movies we've covered so far. As we've established, most Bollywood movies are musicals, and usually the songs are sung by performers other than the actors, known as playback singers. These used to be really common in Hollywood musicals, like when Marnie Nixon provided the singing vocals for Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, Natalie Wood in West Side Story, and Deborah Kerr in The King and I. Maybe the most famous playback singer in Indian cinema, which would make her just one of the most famous singers in Indian history, is Lata Mangeshkar, who passed away just last year at the age of 92, after setting a Guinness World Record for being the most recorded artist between 1948 and 1987. She performed 6 songs in Awaara, 9 in Mughal-E-Azam, 2 in Sholay, 4 in DDLJ, and finally 1 in Lagaan. I had to look this up because during the first musical number in DDLJ, I was thinking, this voice sounds really, really similar to almost every woman who has been singing in every movie so far. Looking at Lata Mangeshkar's filmography is wild. Sometimes she would perform songs for more than 20 movies in a single year. I know I don't have much experience with Indian cinema and I'm new to all of this, but I can't think of a Western equivalent where one person so defined the sound of movies to that degree over 7 decades. It is genuinely astounding.
So after Lagaan, we had another movie from 2001, also starring Aamir Khan, Dil Chahta Hai.
दिल चाहता है.
Like DDLJ, it's an iconic film about the romantic lives of people in their early 20s. But while they both have contemporary settings, DDLJ felt pretty timeless. That kind of romantic comedy drama works in pretty much any era. But Dil Chahta Hai is very much a product of the exact moment it was made. It has that super 2001 aesthetic, from its fashion to its desaturated bluish color grading to its focus on modern youth culture. Aamir Khan is back, and this time he's styled to look like the guy from Savage Garden. The characters hang out in nightclubs, wearing shiny shirts and bucket hats, and the music has a very Y2K electropop sound inspired more by Western culture, since writer-director Farhan Akhtar based a lot of it on his diaries he kept while visiting New York. The movie is about 3 friends dealing with romantic drama as they attempt to figure out their lives after college. Khan plays Akash, the womanizer who doesn't believe in love. Then there's Samir, who tends to jump into relationships too quickly. And finally, Siddharth, or Sid as they call him, the quiet, sensitive one who ends up falling in love with a complicated older woman. And also he looks kind of like Bonehead from Oasis. I thought the woman that Siddharth falls in love with looked familiar, and it turns out I was right. She's played by Dimple Kapadia, who you might remember from Tenet, where DDLJ was about young people whose futures were laid out for them, whether taking over the family company or entering into an arranged marriage. Dil Chahta Hai explores post-college uncertainty in a way that feels way more Gen X, with a lot more aimlessness and confusion, mostly outside the context of Indian traditions. And it became one of the defining movies of 21st century Bollywood, changing the kinds of movies that would get made and what kind of characters they would focus on. And while, of course, it's a musical, it's by far the most grounded movie I've watched so far. It's really aiming to accurately reflect the mood of young people at the time, taking their problems seriously. And since this is such a popular subject in American cinema, this is another movie that felt really familiar to me. You could slot this in alongside The Graduate, Adventureland, Reality Bites, or St. Elmo's Fire. But to be clear, this is much, much better than St. Elmo's Fire, which is a shockingly bad movie. Of all the movies I've watched so far, this is the one where the lack of on-screen physical intimacy was the most noticeable. Compared to something like DDLJ, this is more mature and grounded, and it just seems like a movie that is about sex to some extent. So not having even a single visible kiss couldn't help but feel a bit jarring. But there is one scene that hilariously subverts that. Samir and a girl he met on vacation go back to his hotel room, presumably to hook up, and then the film cuts to this shot slowly dollying across the room as you hear what sounds like Samir moaning. And then the camera reveals that he is bound and gagged lying on the floor because it turns out she was a thief and has robbed him. I imagine this must have been a bit shocking for Indian viewers, thinking that there was actually about to be a sex scene, something that never happens in these movies, before the big comedic reveal arrives. Although after doing a bit of research online, I saw that Aamir Khan did finally kiss a co-star on screen 8 years later in 3 Idiots, another iconic movie about modern Indian youth.
A major part of this movie is about the main characters going on a vacation to Goa, a beautiful region in India right by the ocean. And since, like we said, this video is all about the full immersive experience, I thought, hey, maybe I should also go on a vacation to Goa. You know, to know what it feels like.
Despite being even hotter and more humid, Goa was a really nice break from the non-stop intensity of Mumbai and risking my life every time I crossed the street. Fittingly, after Dil Chahta Hai, Goa became a place that a lot of Indian students from big cities would go to escape and get away from things. Since India is way less expensive than the US, I was able to stay in this really luxurious hotel that I absolutely would not be able to afford back home. And so I spent a few days hanging out by the beach, watching Bollywood movies, and working on this script. So it was a work trip, and therefore it's a tax write-off. And since I was in the area, I had to pay a visit to Chapora Fort, the nearby spot where one of the most iconic scenes from Dil Chahta Hai takes place. And after a couple days, my work vacation had come to an end, and it was time to return to Mumbai. And speaking of Mumbai, this is where the climax of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol takes place. And in case you missed our last episode, we now have an ongoing campaign to get Paramount Pictures to invite me, Patrick Willems, to the world premiere of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 because I love these movies to death and I would just really like to attend this because I think it would be awesome. So anyway, be sure to contact your local representatives, or probably more helpfully Paramount Pictures, share the hashtag MissionImpassable, and let's see if we can make this happen. I bet we can. I'm feeling good about it. Okay, thank you for your time. Back to the episode.
And now we arrive at the final movie on the list. Om Shanti Om, the 2007 comedy drama starring, once again, Shah Rukh Khan.
It's written and directed by Farah Khan, the first female director that we've covered here, who is also the movie's choreographer. This one really feels like a culmination of everything I've been watching. It's a movie literally celebrating Bollywood, like the whole thing is about the Hindi film industry. So it's packed with cameos and references, and I'm not gonna lie, I felt pretty proud whenever I'd spot one. Like the opening shot has a visible poster for Mughal-E-Azam, and one recurring location has a billboard advertising Sholay. It's set in the 1970s, about an aspiring actor named Om, who is in love with a famous actress named Shanti Priya, played by Deepika Padukone. This is her very first movie, but she's gone on to become one of the biggest stars in India. She has a major role in modern masterpiece XXX, The Return of Xander Cage. She's the one who introduced Natu Natu at this year's Oscars. And earlier this year, she reunited with Shah Rukh Khan in Pathaan, currently the highest grossing Indian film of 2023. If you haven't seen Om Shanti Om, and you should because it's great, here's a warning that I'm about to get into spoilers. So feel free to pause it here and come back after. Okay, so halfway through the movie, the two main characters die. But this isn't really a spoiler if you're familiar with the tropes of Bollywood storytelling. They're killed in a fire caused by a villainous movie producer at Film City, the huge film studio complex in Mumbai where most Bollywood movies are shot. Then suddenly, the story jumps ahead 30 years to the present day, where Om has been reincarnated as the son of a famous actor and is now a huge Bollywood star himself. See, this is a reincarnation revenge movie, an extremely popular storytelling trope in Indian cinema. For example, RRR director S.S. Rajamouli's earlier film, Ega, is about a man who is murdered and then must seek revenge when he is reincarnated as a housefly. And so Om Shanti Om spans 30 years of Indian cinema and has countless homages to its past and present, with a reborn Om even giving an acceptance speech about the inspiring power of movies as he recalls his previous life, before embarking on a quest to find the man who killed him and the woman he loved, something he eventually confronts him with through a musical number. The film is about the industry in a lot of specific ways, but one in particular is central to the plot. Om, once a lowly background extra, is reincarnated as the son of a famous actor with the last name Kapoor. So he becomes an instant star. As we've seen with Raj Kapoor and his father Prithviraj, Kapoor is a name with huge significance in Indian cinema. Om Shanti Om gets its title from a song it references in its opening scene, belonging to an earlier reincarnation revenge movie, Kars, starring Raj Kapoor's son, Rishi Kapoor. And in 2007, Om Shanti Om even opened opposite the movie debut of his grandson, Ranbir Kapoor. The film is, in a way, about the stronghold that dynasties have on Bollywood, and what being born into a nepotistic family can do for your career. But it also pretty much revels in the idea. The big centerpiece of the film is a 9-minute musical number featuring over 30 cameos from huge Indian stars of various generations, including parents and children. Look, I'm new at this, so I was unfamiliar with a lot of them, but I did spot Saif Ali Khan from Dil Chahta Hai, Kajol from DDLJ, and Dharmender from Sholay. And then also Priyanka Chopra, but I already knew who she was before. And a couple scenes earlier, there's a quick cameo from Amitabh Bachchan, the other star of Sholay. Also, it must be noted, this song is such a banger. I've been listening to it all week.
Since Om Shanti Om is all about making movies and the film industry, a lot of it takes place at Film City, this big film studio complex right in Mumbai where the majority of Bollywood movies are shot. And just like many American movie studios, there are tours open to the public. So we figured we should go check it out. I've been to the Warner Brothers lot and the Disney lot, both in Burbank, and this was very different. Instead of endless, flat concrete, the tour bus took us through all these mountainous dirt roads with a jungle all around us. And every so often we would see a film set with huge tarps rigged up all around it to block it from the public. At one point we could see the top of a big blue screen poking up over one, where the next day Shah Rukh Khan was going to be shooting a big action scene. Now this whole time, our tour guide was giving one of the hammiest performances that I've ever seen in my entire life. Constantly doing impressions and singing songs, and he would deliver his speech in rapid-fire Hindi, and then, for me, the only white person on the trip, he would repeat a condensed version of that in English. For your viewing pleasure, here is a quick clip to show you what it was like.
Oh, my cute little boy, if you want your girl, love you always, don't marry her.
I hope that guy's having a good day. On the tour, we got to visit various sets they've built, and we saw some shoots in progress. And then they took us to a big facility where we saw a wax museum, which featured the alien from the Indian remake of E.T. I bet you didn't know that exists. Then we watched this whole workshop about post-production, which demonstrated how Foley artists make sound effects and how green screen works. For this part, Siddhant and I were volunteers who had to pretend we were in jail. Honestly, I think we gave pretty believable performances. And then, to finish the tour, we watched a live dance number that explained the whole history of Bollywood. Like, it was basically this entire video so far, just in dance form. So I guess it probably would have been easier for me to just upload the clip of that instead of bothering to write a whole video essay as well, but you know, you live and you learn. Okay, but here's the weird part. Later that day, we checked the news and saw that 2 hours after we had left, a huge fire had broken out at Film City, destroying the set of a TV show that was shooting there. And in Om Shanti Om, which I had just watched, a major part of the story involves a set catching on fire and burning down at Film City. Coincidence? Probably, but maybe not. And so, that's it. My time in India has sadly come to an end. I've got to head back to New York now, back to cold weather. But I've got to say, this whole experience, this country, these movies, it's all been spectacular.
Watching Morrison's second onstage arrest through this lens just goes to show that even on a 35th watch, Oliver Stone's The Doors has yet more horrors to reveal. But now for our next segment. What can Martha Coolidge's 1985 masterpiece, Real Genius, tell us about the militarization?
Is it me or is this infinitely watchable?
I can't believe it's only been 4 hours.
What's going on in here?
Patrick, you're back. Where were you?
I was getting into the spirit of Bollywood, and I may have gotten a little bit carried away. The good news is that I am more confident than ever in my knowledge of Hindi cinema. The bad news is that we're out of money again.
A trip to India should not cost $38,000.
Oh, it doesn't. But there are casinos in India, and $36,000 later, I can confirm I do not know how to play baccarat.
Oh, you roll doubles, you get out of jail.
Right, that's what I thought. Anyway, the point is, we're back at square one.
Actually, you're more broke than before. We had to charge you for the studio.
But hey, I created a whole video, so at least the studio didn't go to waste.
Is it about Kilms?
It's about Kilms.
Emma, I'm proud of you. Good work. Now, move over. I gotta shoot a conclusion. And so, several incredibly long flights and a couple days of jet lag later, I'm back. And while still a novice, I know a whole lot more about Bollywood than I did last week. I know about the Kapoor family dynasty, about the history of playback singers and sync sound in Indian film, and I am now a genuine fan of Shah Rukh Khan, who is one of our great modern movie stars. I also learned about the many other stars and filmmakers who aren't actually related but have the last name Khan, like Aamir Khan and Farah Khan, and also Salman Khan, who I only saw briefly in his cameo in Om Shanti Om, but I know is a big movie star. I know so much more than I used to, but it has mostly made me realize how little I still really know. Like, it's obvious that Raj Kapoor and Guru Dutt were major filmmakers, but what else did they make? I don't know. We skipped over the entire decade of the 80s, so I have no idea what was happening in Bollywood during that time. After Sholay, how did Ramesh Sippy follow up the biggest movie ever? And we didn't really watch any modern action movies, and I know that is a huge genre in India. And look, mostly, I just really want to know who all those people in Om Shanti Om are. There were so many references and cameos in that movie that I knew I was missing. And the thing that I keep coming back to is, this is only Bollywood. I have barely scratched the surface, and there are still so many other industries in India. Telugu cinema has exploded in the last 20 years, and then there's Kollywood, Sandalwood, and so many more. Spending all this time watching these movies and learning about them and visiting the culture that produced them, it is more insane to me than ever that we here in the West just completely ignore them. And if you're an American going, I love Bollywood movies, well, that's awesome, but you are an anomaly. Western culture just decided decades ago that, oh yeah, Indian movies are all those wacky musicals where everyone's always dancing. And yes, some are wacky, and most are musicals, but let's be real. Wouldn't most American movies be better if they were musicals? Yes, they would. These 8 movies included serious social dramas, grounded coming-of-age movies, Western action movies, romantic comedies, and sports movies. Each of them felt totally different. So if you've never seen an Indian movie, or more likely if you're watching this channel, if you've only seen RRR, this list is a great place to start. There is something for whatever mood you're in. And each of these is a gateway to new genres, filmmakers, and stars. So yeah, overall, I would say I learned a lot. I also learned that, unsurprisingly, Indian food is way better in India, and I already miss it so much. And I also learned that I'm very bad at cricket, and I'm probably going to regret putting that footage in this video. So in this video, I have given you 8 movies that are great starting points if you want to start exploring Bollywood and Indian cinema. But let's say you want to go further. Well, that is why I am so glad that our sponsor on this episode is Mubi, the curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the world. See, Mubi has this incredibly diverse collection of great movies, new ones, old ones from all around the world. The platform is curated into various collections, but you can also search by country. So if you browse the Indian cinema section, you can see things like Gangs of Wasseypur, parts 1 and 2, a Bollywood gangland saga that Martin Scorsese is a big fan of, or Shakespeare Walla, which was a Merchant Ivory production starring Shashi Kapoor, Raj Kapoor's brother, who played young Raj in Awaara. But here, let me take a look at what they've got streaming right now to give you some recommendations. So, they have In a Lonely Place, one of my favorite noir films. They have some amazing animated movies. They have The Triplets of Belleville, the original classic Ghost in the Shell. They have Lars von Trier's Melancholia. They actually have a lot of Lars von Trier, including The Kingdom Exodus, his new TV show. They have Chloe Zhao's The Rider, Lee Chang-dong's Burning, great movie. Obviously, they are the exclusive place to stream Park Chan-wook's latest film, Decision to Leave. Plus, they have his movies Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and Lady Vengeance, which are awesome. They even have Terrence Malick's IMAX documentary, The Voyage of Time. And Haywire, Steven Soderbergh's action movie, which rules. Look, I could do this all day, so I will just end this by saying Mubi is genuinely one of my favorite streaming services. And it's one where, unlike other streaming services, you don't have to waste an hour searching through a bunch of trash that looks like it was made by an algorithm. It's curated by people who love movies, and it is a fantastic place to discover new films and filmmakers. And here's the good news. Right now, they are offering a special deal to my viewers where you can get your first 30 days, a whole month of great cinema, totally free to try it out by going to mubi.com/Patrick H. Willems. Again, that is mubi.com/Patrick H. Willems. So come on, go enjoy some good movies. Movies are great. Go watch them. And so, I guess that's it. That was, a fun trip, a fun escape, but I think now it's time to return to reality and, leave behind my time in the world of Bollywood. Yeah, I'm gonna miss it. I guess a trip like that is kind of like watching a movie. You immerse yourself in it, you experience it, and then once it's done, you head back out into the real world and move on with your life. It may not be a happy ending, but it's enough. Wait a second, that doesn't feel right. What was that thing that Shah Rukh Khan said in Om Shanti Om?
और अगर ठीक ना हो तो वो दी एंड नहीं है दोस्तों। पिक्चर अभी बाकी है।
प्यार हुआ, इकरार हुआ, जीना यहाँ, मरना यहाँ, इन बाहों को, इन राहों को, छोड़िए छलिया जाए कहाँ। माना दिल तो है अनाड़ी, ये आवारा ही सही। अरे बोल राधा बोल, संगम होगा के नहीं। हर जन्म में रंग बदल के ख्वाबों के पर्दों पे हम खिलते। हम है राही प्यार के, फिर मिलेंगे चलते चलते। हम है राही प्यार के, फिर मिलेंगे चलते चलते। ओ हसीना जुल्फों वाली जाने जहां, चाहे मुझको जंगली कह दे सारा जहां। महफिल महफिल तू फिरे, याहू दिल करे। महफिल महफिल तू फिरे, याहू दिल करे। बदन पे सितारे लपेटे हुए, हर जन्म में रंग बदल के ख्वाबों के पर्दों पे हम खिलते। हम है राही प्यार के, फिर मिलेंगे चलते चलते। हम है राही प्यार के, फिर मिलेंगे चलते चलते।
And it's done. The Bollywood video is finally completed and released, and now you have presumably watched it through to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun making it. And also, we've been working on this for so long. Like, we came up with the idea for this back in 2020. We've been planning it for like 2.5 years now. It's been in the works for so long. We did the trip back in March. We kept it off of social media so that this would be a surprise for everyone. And now it's done and out there in the world. While I've got you here, I have to like publicly extend the biggest possible thank you to Siddhant, my partner in this whole thing. He pitched me the idea back in 2020. He did all the planning. He came up with a list of movies, figured out all of the shooting locations, basically like the whole shooting schedule. I just went along for the ride. So this would not exist without him. Also, a huge thank you to his parents, who were a big help, his brother, Sushant, who was the camera operator for the really embarrassing cricket sequence. Thank you so much to everyone who worked on the dance sequence. We really wanted to end it with a dance sequence. It just seemed like the thing to do, and everyone was amazing. I wasn't amazing, but everyone else, fantastic, a joy to work with. Look, while I've got you here, this is the end of the video where I like shill and plug stuff. And this episode was obviously an enormous undertaking. It was a lot of work. It was very complicated. And so I'm just going to say, if you want to support the channel, help us hopefully at some point make something on this scale again, so it's not just a once-in-a-lifetime thing. The best place to do that is with the Patreon, where you can sign up, help support the channel. We recently revamped it with new tiers and rewards and perks and all that stuff. So go check it out if you want. Anyway, that is all for now. I'm exhausted. I'm gonna go to sleep. Good night.